You're dealing with stuff today that
Mhm.
nonprofits and donors won't deal with for another 5, maybe even longer years. What are you seeing in terms of how you've seen them shift from the past to today?
1 out of 5 articles is going to mention the phrase subscription fatigue. Because subscription models have been so popular and because there have been bad actors out there, the ones that make it difficult to cancel, that are more extractive, anybody who's a subscriber to any streaming media, the price increases, now there's ads. People have gotten a little bit fed up with some of the bad actors. You need to be delivering value and you need to be demonstrating and communicating that value back to the customer.
Amy Konary, welcome to the Sustainable Giving Podcast.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Looking forward to the conversation today. You and I met a few years ago. You co-founded something called the Subscribed Institute. We're going to talk about that a little bit today. That's very relevant to our audience. But you were somebody that I had reached out to, and I said, "Hey, I'm doing all this research on what's happening in the subscription economy, and then how that's impacting potentially nonprofits, especially when it comes to philanthropic giving." And you were so generous with your time to allow me to interview you and just talk about like what are the things that are happening in the subscription space that our nonprofit leaders can learn from. And so, just right off the top, thank you for your investment already in this community and for everything you're doing.
Absolutely. There's so many parallels between the work that I've been doing and the work that you're doing. And of course, I support as a human in this world many nonprofit businesses in a variety of ways. And so it feels good to be able to help and to be on this podcast.
Yeah, love it. I was talking to a leader the other day, and it's like, who knew that recurring revenue would be good for not just businesses but charities too?
Yeah, I
So
think it
let's
makes a lot of sense. We'll probably talk about that.
Yeah,
But
let's dive in right there. So you, part of your background, which I think is so powerful and why it was so helpful to incorporate some of the insights that you had into the book, is really in this recurring revenue, especially software as a service. People listening would be familiar with the term SaaS.
Mhm.
I wanted to take you back kind of early in your career. For our listeners, one of the things that I love about you is that you were actually studying this sector, this software sector and recurring revenue, and actually coined the phrase SaaS, software as a service. So if anybody wonders, you can blame Amy for that. But I'm just curious, stepping back even before that moment, because you've been an analyst, you've done a lot of things. When did you realize that subscriptions weren't just like a pricing model, but actually a fundamental shift in how businesses operate?
Yeah, absolutely. So I really experienced it from the inside. And what I mean by that is before I became an industry analyst, I have a journalism background. And my first job was at a software company, and the job that they were hiring me for was very different than the job I thought I was going to be going. It's a typical situation, but I love technology, and I thought that I have an opportunity to really see it from the inside. And the software company was very typical for a late 1990s software company. It was not a subscription business other than something called software maintenance. But the primary revenue driver for the company was software licenses. And so, for anyone who remembers buying software in the days before SaaS, it was sold just like any transactional product. You would put your money down. Back in the days when we were all setting up our home offices, maybe you'd get a CD and you'd install your Norton antivirus or whatever equivalent product. And it was up to you to install it, to run it, and to get value out of it. And the company I was working for wasn't a consumer product, it was a business product. It actually ran process manufacturing, HR, and accounting for businesses. And in the space that
Okay.
we were in, the product that we sold was upwards in the millions of dollars. So for the customers, they would spend, say, $1 million. We would give them a lot of software in the form of a CD at that time. And then it was up to the customer to install it and figure out how to get value out of it. For the provider, we collected all of our money, or a substantial amount of money up front. We recognized all of that revenue up front. It was just a product transaction. And then the customer was contractually obligated to pay us something called software maintenance. It was pegged at a percentage of that license fee. So, say 20% of $1 million, they had to pay every year in perpetuity of owning the software. And that was the model. It worked really well for the software provider. It was highly profitable because, of course, the marginal cost of printing another CD once you've
Yeah.
developed the software, fairly low. But for the customer, it shifted all of the risk on the customer in seeing the value. And in fact, at that time, there were companies that, not our customers, but in our space, that went bankrupt, that went out of business because of the cost of trying to install and successfully run software that they were paying millions of dollars for upfront, and then this ongoing maintenance fee. So I
So
really thought it
you're
was
saying the customers themselves were going out of business before they
yes.
could actually
The
install the
customers were
software?
filing for bankruptcy, and they were
Oh my gosh.
citing as a reason, I won't name names, one of these companies still exists, they shifted their model, but a failed blank implementation was
Wow.
one of the material reasons that they filed for bankruptcy. So, this is horrendous, I thought. I cannot believe that this is how the software industry works. Again, there was no motivation from the software vendors to change anything. So the only thing that was going to change this would be a huge disruption. So I became an industry analyst because I thought that was, again, journalism degree. I thought industry analyst sounds interesting. You get to write, you get to research, you get to meet executives. You have great access as an industry analyst to cutting edge stuff. And I started to notice that in the software industry, there was this convergence of factors that really smelled like disruption for me. One of them was the beginning of the cloud. So think like early 2000s. Most of us still maybe had dial up internet. And so the idea of running software over dial up internet like that wouldn't work,
Yeah.
especially for business software. But you were seeing this very rapid improvement and you were seeing it happen very quickly. And so there was this idea that a few entrepreneurs had, they left their most of these people who founded these early SaaS companies had worked at one of these traditional software companies like I had. Oracle was the breeding the where both Mark Benioff, who founded Salesforce, and my boss, Teen Zwo, who founded my company Zora, they were both working at Oracle. They left. They actually got a little bit of seed money from Oracle at the time, hey, to go try and launch this new software service offering that could be run over the internet. And in exchange for access to that service, there would be an ongoing subscription fee that the customer would pay. And so there was the idea that we have a different way of delivering the software. And that different delivery mechanism actually caused a whole bunch of disruption because I didn't mention in the first part, but with business software, any type of software, it's frequently updated. And what would happen in the old model
Hmm.
is you would mail your customer a bunch of CDs, and then they'd have to try to find the time to implement it, to test it, and then to roll it off. Like maintaining the software was a huge hassle. And that was what your maintenance fee paid for. It paid for the CDs, but didn't actually pay for up to date software. Again, the onus was on the
Hmm.
customer to actually do it. So with the SaaS model, because the software was being run by the provider, that software could continuously be updated. So it's a lot of a history lesson, but there were a lot of different dynamics that came together. It was way more than simply let's shift to a subscription fee. It was, hey, this is the software that you buy initially is going to keep getting better and better. And you're going to get value over time. So let's take on, as a provider, some of that risk of making sure you see value, and you won't pay us unless you do. So that was the fundamental economic shift that happened with the subscription model. It wasn't simply, hey, let's take the same CDs and we'll send them to you in the mail and you just pay us a subscription. That
Yeah.
wouldn't have been as compelling. It was the fact that the service kept getting better, that they were really shifting that risk of success from just being a problem at the customer to solve to now being this joint relationship. And that's really what caused the shift in the software industry.
Well, and part of what I'm hearing, and I think this is where we can see some of the parallels from today, is you saw a couple different kind of trends coming together. You saw the internet. You mentioned cloud, but really the predecessor to that was really the internet, digital. You were in the software space. There was the traditional software, and then they started to see this. Hey, what if this was actually a service? What if we actually could help support people as they implement this? A different way to deliver. And so I think the parallel to me is, as we see this from even the charitable giving sector, is like there's a couple different things that are happening. Like there were technical things that were happening. There was infrastructure that was kind of coming into place. And I would love you to camp on this for a second. There were also individuals that saw that, and they, as you mentioned, Mark Benioff, Chien So at Zora, were like, "Hey, I'm gonna go work on this." Right?
Hmm.
What was it like being in those early days with people that were like, even just your observation? Because I think that we're in those days. Spoiler alert with regards to philanthropy, and a lot of it does go back to those old consumer and B2B roots. But what was it like being in those early days, those early adopters that were stepping out?
Yeah. So, I mean, of course, it was exciting, but there were a lot of forces working against those early companies and those early leaders. Anytime you're trying to shift the status quo, you have people who have a vested interest in maintaining it. And I mentioned in the beginning, there was no reason why any software company, particularly a publicly traded company, would want to shift to subscription because they'd have an immediate cash flow issue moving from getting all their money up front to then suddenly, and I had figured out you had the same customer and they were going to pay you in the old model and now they're going to pay you in subscription. It would take you about 3 to 4 years to get the cash that you would have had in the previous model and then multiply that times any number of customers. So there were a lot of economic forces that were locking the industry in the status quo. So what those early companies had to do was a lot of evangelism, but they also had to try a different tactic. If they simply went and tried to sell to the buyer that these big companies were selling to, it would have been really difficult to get the conversation. Instead, they started to shift to, who are they actually helping? And they were helping the business user, not the central purchasing department. They were actually helping in the case of Salesforce, the actual Salesforce automation, the seller, the account executive. So they changed their model, and instead of having conversations with centralized IT first, because the subscription model created a new opportunity for them to make something that was viable to sell to an account executive. Account executive couldn't spend
Hmm.
$1 million on software, but an individual account executive, they could spend $5.99 a month on something that really transformed their role, made them much more productive. We're sort of seeing that a little bit today with some of the AI tools. For anybody that's experimented with some of those tools today, it's a very similar dynamic in the early adoption of some of these new models where you kind of go directly to people who are going to see the benefit. At least in the business side, that's what we had seen. So initially they had opened up a new buyer. Now over time that shifted and now the predominant buyer is the classic buyer of software, but that's only because the business user said, "Look, this is working really well for us." And that old software that you bought that's never up to date, that feels like to us it's not giving us the value that we need to see. And
Yeah.
so it was an uphill battle, but it took a period of time, a couple of years to shift. And I really don't believe that it would have taken off, that model had taken off if they had simply tried to knock on the doors of the
Yeah.
central IT purchasing department.
Well, let's try to we'll see how we can do with this. I'd love to experiment
Mhm.
with kind of overlaying that insight into the space we're in right now, philanthropic giving. We've got a couple of different users or buyers, as it were. We've got the nonprofit itself, right,
Mhm.
organizationally, which certainly does have different personas within. You do have the fundraising, director of fundraising, the vice president of development type of person. You have the head of marketing, but you also in the ecosystem you have providers, so technology platforms, agencies. We do advisory work. We would be an example of a provider to the nonprofit space. And then the third piece is probably the donor themselves, like the donor
Mhm.
who wants to give on a recurring basis and they want it to be easy. As you think about kind of same song, different verse with regards to philanthropy, Who is that early adopter? Who's the end user who benefits the most? I mean, at least from what, and help me suss this out. Just trying to think
Yeah.
about it.
So thinking about how this story translates, here's how is I have these conversations with a lot of businesses, primarily, and every business is a bit different. They're all different personas. There's an ecosystem. There's distributing, and by business I mean everything from a software company to an automotive OEM to coffee companies. I think there are a couple of things that we're all trying to do. One of those is finding out who are we providing value to, and are there ways that we can build enduring relationships that put value at the center of that. Then that is a high level North Star. So then when you take that and you look at the different personas within the nonprofit world, and maybe we'll take, I have the most experience with donor because I haven't worked for a nonprofit.
Yeah.
I've been on the board of a nonprofit, but as a donor, what is, what is the value that I'm looking to try to create? I'm looking to have an impact with something that I care about. Are there ways, so of thinking about, can someone who fits, a donor who is like me, are there ways that you can deepen that for me by, a variety of different things. So if I think about the analogous in the software world where I spend my time, it's thinking about, are there different features or functions that someone might buy? So maybe you have a similar a product that you're selling to me, a package. And then once you understand me really well and what I want, there's some sort of an adjacent offering that makes a ton of sense. Maybe it's another nonprofit that you have a relationship with that I'd maybe also like to help because that's going to help me create a similar outcome. In the software
Mhm.
world, maybe it's another piece of functionality that's going to really help me achieve my outcome or solve my problem, which, let's say I'm the CFO, it means I want to have reliable and efficient financial operations. That's what Zora sells. So I know that well. um, then think about, are there opportunities to reach donors that you haven't been able to practically reach for a variety of reasons? Maybe the package that you have today is too big or too small, or it doesn't have the right type of impact. So what we see companies doing is segmentation and thinking about, how do we create a relationship with another type of donor with an offering that makes more sense for them? Maybe they're a very young person, or maybe they're an older person, or maybe they have, some sort of special financial construct where they could give a portion of what they do to some sort of a nonprofit on an ongoing basis, or that they have designated that they would like to do that. So it's I think that no matter what you are talking about, when it comes to the principles that gave rise to the SaaS industry, and I'm sure the principles that you talk about so much in your book, it's really about understanding your customer, what they value, and then creating a relationship to make that ongoing. And that relationship, yeah, it has a financial construct, and that financial construct should be mutually beneficial and fair. So I am willing to pay a certain price that looks a certain way, and in exchange, I get what should be ongoing value. Now, where these offerings fall short universally is where the value I get is really just a one-time thing. I go to an event or I see a film or a concert. That's a one-time thing. That isn't something, as useful as a subscription arrangement can be. It starts to become extractive when you're delivering all the value up front and the customer's not seeing any more value over time. I think we've all had experiences with that in our
Yeah.
consumer world. So you do have to think long and hard as well. The example that I gave of the software industry, that ongoing value was, this software is always up to date. And the company is constantly innovating so that any new functionality that we're building into the software, we have a whole engineering team, you're going to get it because
Yeah.
you continue to pay us. And that proposition is what makes it a sustainable approach for a subscription type of a model.
Yeah. Well, and just to double down on that ongoing value that we do talk about that, it's obviously looks a little bit different in a philanthropic setting, but it is
Mhm.
absolutely critical. And I think it's in my experience, it has a lot to do with actually seeing the ongoing impact and the ongoing well, let me start with this. The ongoing need. This is something that is not just
Mhm.
a tonight at the gala that we're at or, during this emergency situation that we're responding to, but truly how do we actually what is that ongoing need, and then how do we help donors see the ongoing impact that they're creating. One of the myths in the that I think comes from some subscriptions, that was a myth in the subscription world and has ported over to recurring giving, sustainable giving, is this myth of the set it and forget it. Like,
Mm.
ooh, maybe we can get them to commit and then we won't remind them that they've committed, and therefore maybe we'll get more dollars out of them. Well, in my experience, that doesn't work anymore, right? It's like
Yeah.
they know they're subscribed.
They should be, and I think that you're absolutely right. It's not a good experience as a person, and I think 100% of people listening here can agree with that, right? You look at your credit card statement, you're like, "What? I didn't even know I had that." I had that experience just last week with a publication, and it sent me a renewal notice, and I thought, "I canceled that thing." And then it took me several clicks to cancel it. So that is not a value relationship. That is an extractive relationship, meaning they signed me up and hoped that I would forget. And because I didn't even know I had the subscription, I hadn't been reading articles, and that company had to know that. They had to
Yep.
know that I wasn't getting value, and in that case, what you should be doing as a company that has a recurring relationship is you should be communicating with me throughout and helping me find ways to get value. So I think you made a great point about the impact. And I'm sure in a lot of cases there is some event that compels a lot of people to coalesce around a need at any given time. But you have to think about beyond that event, how do you keep people plugged into the impact that you're having, invested in that impact? And so there is an onus on communication and an onus on helping that donor or whatever role that persona has in your ecosystem understand how they're continuing to contribute to that impact and giving them an opportunity to guide that over time as well. So you're asking for feedback perhaps, and I think one of the other a lot of times I will get asked the question of what makes a great subscription. We've indexed a lot on ongoing value. Another element is curation. So think about any of us who've subscribed to those box of the month type things where
Hmm.
you're getting a surprise. Not my favorite example of subscriptions, but certainly there's a need for that and an element of curation. But there's also this element of surprise and excitement that can happen not just with curation, but with other types of subscriptions. So we see offers to specific events. It might be a one-time event, right? Maybe you have a
Yeah.
discounted ticket to something, or the ability to be first in line for something, or an exclusive podcast, or a talk, or you get a tote bag. I mean, there are all different ways as well of kind of surprising and delighting people and making them feel like they're part of a community, which is another important element. Even if you don't have, a big update on here's the impact we had, just a thank you that we're so excited that you continue to be part of our community. We'd love to hear from you. As a reminder, here's what we've done, here's what we're planning. All of those things are really important.
Over the past few years, as we've worked with dozens of organizations to grow sustainable recurring giving, I keep hearing the same thing from leaders. They don't just want tactics, they want community. They want to know that they're not doing this alone. And for some teams, they're not quite ready for our sustainable giving deep dive accelerator, but they are ready for something more accessible, something that helps equip them, not just one person, but their whole team. That's exactly why we created RISE. RISE is a new implementation-focused group advisory program designed to help organizations grow recurring giving that actually lasts. It's a place where we turn insights into action, and then action turns into momentum. Inside our Rise program, you'll get live group advisory calls, office hours with me, ongoing education and training, access to guest experts, and a private community where you can ask questions, share ideas, and learn from peers who are wrestling with the same challenges you are. You'll also have access to our advisory team, so when you're stuck, unsure, or deciding what to try next, you're not guessing alone. Here's the heart of it. You don't have to grow sustainable giving on your own. Rise is where leaders grow recurring giving together with guidance, accountability, and forward momentum. Enrollment is open now, and if this sounds like something your organization or your team needs, I would love for you to learn more or raise your hand. You can visit sustainablegiving.org/rise to explore the program or to express interest. We'd love to have you grow with us. Again, that's sustainablegiving.org/rise to sign up or let us know that you're interested. Looking forward to seeing you in the program. One of the things I think is super fun about this conversation is, as I mentioned, obviously, I think that the subscription economy, specifically software as a service, but the broader subscription economy has really gone before and we
Mhm.
see this in fundraising very regularly, that a consumer trend often precedes donor behavior. So we saw that
Mhm.
in the early 2000s with digital fundraising, right? Even the dot-com, boom and bust had already happened, right? By then.
Mhm.
Well, it wasn't until the kind of 2006, 2007 era that fundraisers started to be really successful with recurring giving. And by the way, people sort of project that as fundraisers are behind or like lag. And I think the truth is that the cultural and economic and technological adoption lags, and that's
Yeah.
what we were seeing. And so as people got used to, using social media and e-commerce and spending money related to their online personas, that's where then that started to pave the way for generosity. So, people started to think, wait a second, if I buy my, clothes online, maybe I should be willing to give to the charity that matters to me or the cause that matters to me. Fast forward. So we are really seeing some of those same sort of early consumer trends leading to philanthropic adoption. So as somebody who's seen that journey from the early days on the consumer side, I'm very curious over the last 10, really 20 years, but we'll just say the last 10 years. How have you seen subscriptions and memberships shift? Because I think there are probably some insights in like I see my conversation with you, Amy, as almost like a future casting conversation. You're dealing with stuff today that
Mhm.
nonprofits and donors won't deal with for another 5 to 10, maybe even longer years in terms of trends. So what are you seeing in terms of how you've seen them shift from the past to today?
Yeah, no, very interesting question. I'm excited to dig into it. One, I absolutely agree with you that consumers have to be ready for an approach, and I think that you're absolutely right in that it took some time, and the software industry and businesses, and we've seen many industries shift to more recurring type models. That's been a big part of my career, has been helping companies build recurring models, everything from, John Deere to GM to, a lot of the EV charging. There's a lot of things beyond software and a lot of consumer products that have shifted this way. And it took some time because the consumers, had to be ready to have that kind of a relationship with a provider. It was very different. Uh, Three big things that I'm seeing that hopefully should be instructive. One is a little bit of a warning, and that is if you Google subscription these days, just look for it in the news, you're likely going to pull up 1 out of 5 articles is going to mention the phrase subscription fatigue, which is because subscription models have been so popular and because there have been bad actors out there. So we were talking a little bit earlier about the ones that make it difficult to cancel, that are more extractive. Think of the anybody who's a subscriber to any streaming media, the price increases. Now there's ads where there didn't used to be ads. People have gotten a little bit fed up with some of the bad actors, and that's casting a pall across all subscriptions. So, does that mean that everyone's going to cancel everything all at once? Absolutely not. What it does mean is that the bar is higher for you to be not only a good actor, but what does a good actor mean? It means you need to be delivering value and you need to be demonstrating and communicating that value back to the customer. And so I think it's a good shift and a good reset. It raises the bar for companies, again, to really not be extractive and companies and nonprofits, let's say, but to instead think about how we're providing value. And also you've got to make it as easy to pause the relationship or maybe even end the relationship as it is to sign up, because people remember that and they'll come back. They absolutely will. But if you make it hard to cancel, or, one of the things we're seeing is that companies and nonprofits as well that give their customers the ability maybe to just put things on hold. Let's keep the relationship intact. But I get it, for the next 6 months or so, you're going to put a pause on giving. I totally understand. But we're here and ready for you when you come back. All you need to do is push a button, and that type of thing is really going a long way, in
Yeah.
this time of subscription fatigue.
Yeah, and that's something that we're just starting to see come into the nonprofit space,
Mhm,
that sort of
mhm.
pause, skip, the downgrade, and a lot of those, again, those are playbooks that come from the subscription space. I'm interested, what separates organizations that successfully scale recurring revenue from those who
Yeah.
stall?
So I will, this gets into the second, so I promised there were 3 things that I was gonna foreshadow.
Yeah.
So one of the big ways that companies are looking to scale, first of all, it's to retain the existing relationships that they have, and sometimes that might be allowing a customer to pause a relationship or even downgrade it. Maybe they were giving at a certain amount and they need to scale that back, and making it super easy for them to do that. So
Mhm.
holding on to those existing relationships. And then the other element is thinking, are there, and I'm sorry, I'm going to use a business term, but I don't know how to unbusinessify it. Are there other ways that they can monetize new relationships within their
Mhm.
ecosystem? So one of the big trends that I see from my vantage point, it manifests in different pricing models, which at the end of the day is really, do we have a different way of packaging what we have in a fair value for a different type of buyer? Let's say we feel like we've tapped out all of the existing subscribers or donors, or that look like this, but there is an opportunity for someone different. They just don't want to have the exact same relationship as everyone that looks the first way. And so what does that look like? In the software industry, it might be a pay per use model. So instead of having a flat subscription in perpetuity, maybe there's an opportunity to just, give a little bit here or there. So
Mhm.
a little bit of it's back to the future, but that might be, in many cases, we're seeing that usage type model as being an on-ramp to, yeah, we wanna have, more of an ongoing relationship with you.
Let
And
me let me
sometimes
let me
we
ask you a question specific, trying to translate that, monetizing new relationships, to the charitable giving sector. One thought, and this may be off base, but if you look at recurring giving, or what is known in, if you think about the UK or Europe, is regular giving, a
Mm,
lot of that, which is a much more dominant practice, by the way, regular giving as a philanthropic practice dates back, decades. They've really,
mhm,
it's a majority of charitable revenue over there. A lot of it is very small gifts. It's $5, £5 a month, that kind of thing. Whereas in the US, much lower percentage of people participating in recurring giving. That's growing, but usually higher dollar amounts, 40 bucks a
mhm,
month, 50 bucks a month. So one potential just thought experiment would be, do we ask for $5 a month, $7 a month, $10 a month, some sort of, like, just basic super easy commitment. But then the idea is, then what are the additional gifts on top of that, or invite them to the gala, or send them additional deals. We already see, on average today, Amy, the average recurring donor um, will give on average another 25% on top of their annual value. So if they're
mhm.
committed and they're giving, $500, or yeah, we'll call it $500 a year in annual recurring giving, they're going to give another $125 on average already.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
So
no, I think
yeah.
what you're describing is I think the exact right way to think about what I'm trying to get at, which is if you lower that per month price point, does that open up a whole new set of ongoing donors for you potentially, who then might give over and above beyond that, maybe not right away, but once you have that relationship intact, it gives you the opportunity to think of other ways to scale and grow it. So that variety of approaches, and kind of goes back to the early conversation that we had around, who are the different people within the ecosystem that benefit, how do they benefit, and then are there ways of exchanging value in that scenario. I'd say the third thing that I'm seeing absolutely impact my space, it's kind of a no-brainer because my space is software, is AI and all
Hmm.
things AI. Um, Obviously, AI is impacting all of our lives in a myriad of ways. Where I'm seeing it impact my little slice of the things that I look at within software and recurring revenue are, the impacts that AI can have in delivering value. So we're seeing that tools that are incorporating AI are really helping to supercharge some of the outcomes for the software. So more customers getting more value. However,
Yeah.
the customer isn't necessarily willing to pay exponentially more for that value, and the costs to the software provider are quite uncertain. And there are all kinds of trust issues associated with it as well. So there's a big question mark, but when I think about inflection points, I entered this space at the inflection point of cloud. We're absolutely at another inflection point right now
Yeah.
in technology, and I expect it'll spill out to all aspects of our lives.
Fascinating. Okay, I've got a couple more questions for you. This is super helpful. What role does leadership's belief in and like their commitment to recurring revenue play?
Oh, it's the biggest factor in a company being successful because everything that we've been talking about, and again, I'll use my example in the software industry. It was a huge culture shift to go from, I'm going to give my customers something that could bankrupt them, and I'm going to laugh my way all the way to the bank.
Yeah,
I mean, it wasn't exactly that extreme, but that's how I remember it, to
yeah,
my sort of, to, gosh, we are not successful unless our customer is successful. And that shift meant that there were whole parts of the company that had to change. First of all, they used to have a customer support team, and it was really technical. You would call back in the day and, like, the CD is broken, or I need a new 255 or whatever. They would mail it to you, or maybe there was training around the software. To customer success, there's an entire field or a discipline or a job that didn't exist before, that's called customer success, because the onus of the customer being successful is now the problem of the software vendor. It didn't used to be before, because they
mm,
didn't care. They'd sold most of what they needed to sell up front. If they didn't get their maintenance, okay, but they were usually contractually obligated to pay it forever, so they were mostly getting it. But today, they had to build, whole parts of the organization, customer success. The finance team and the metrics that finance are looking at are completely different. The way the product is developed is completely different, because you do have to have something that keeps getting better over time. And in order to make all of those changes, which are, many of them are really cultural changes, you do need to have that top-down buy-in and direction, and without it, it's not that you can't make the change happen, but I've seen it take years and years to
yeah,
happen, and you get part of the way there, but not really whole of the way there, and
yeah.
it's really difficult without that top-down commitment.
Well, when I look at the last, 100 years of nonprofits, including the last decade, have really done well. One of the most common denominators is leadership was like, we're doing this. We're going to make
More.
it happen. There was
Yep.
commitment. They managed to up to the board. They
Yep.
rethought about how they did finance. You'll love this. I've got a wave report in the works right now, as we record this, on lessons from subscription finance that we can use in terms of forward looking, not backward looking. Some of the stuff from your founder, the founder of Zora, of his book. Um, Super helpful. I mentioned the Subscribed Institute. I think this is a great place to kind of land our conversation. So you founded this thing called the Subscribed Institute. This is actually how I found you. Was I
Mhm.
had quoted this chart that I had seen for years called the Subscription Economy Index, and come to find out that was through this company called Zora and this thing called the Subscribed Institute. So you founded this. What does it exist for, and what do you hope it can help the sector accomplish?
So it exists because being a recurring revenue company is not easy. And it takes more than simply having a tool that can do recurring billing, which is what Zora offers. And my pitch to Teen, who was our CEO back at the time when I joined the company, was unless you Zora can help its customers actually be successful with their recurring businesses, you're not going to be successful selling billing software to them because they aren't going to have a software practice to bill for. They're not going to have enough customers to actually be a good customer for Zora. So it really is. I talked about this notion of customer success. I really altruistically understand this model, and I want to help companies be successful at it because I think it is a better model for people, products, and the planet. And I have a variety of examples of situations where that is absolutely true. Some of my most favorite subscription models I've had a chance to work on are ones that are circular economy. So they take products out of landfills and things like
Mm.
bicycles and mobile phones, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of reasons why I think this is a better model. And I know it's hard. So what I did in order to scale that, because I'm just the one person, is I built a think tank model within Zora. Because we're a software product, we're able to make all of these direct observations into different businesses at an anonymized and aggregate basis because we're running their businesses on our platform. So I was able to produce benchmarks that showed the overall size of the subscription economy, which is that subscription economy index report that you
Hmm.
referenced. But even going farther than that, because actually right before this conversation, I'm working on the updated one for this year. We're able to look at how are companies organizing themselves for success. So some of that advice that I gave earlier, specifically the advice on having multiple monetization approaches, that comes directly from the subscription economy data that we have that's showing the companies on Zora who have more than one approach are the ones that are growing in a more sustainable way over time. So it's gosh, it's a dream job for me because I'm getting to work with data, which I love, and getting to use my journalism chops and writing research reports and interviewing companies and seeing how they're finding success. And then I'm able to take all those findings and get them directly to the leaders at Zora's customers and even more broadly than that who are faced with decisions all the time. You said something earlier in this conversation, which I wholeheartedly agree with. These are not set it and forget it exercises. So even if you think you had things right 6 months or 12 months or 18 months ago, chances are you're being faced with another unknown situation because we're talking about relationships and environments that are changing at rates we've never seen before. So that ability for me to be able to give companies and people advice that helps them that they can't get anywhere else really feels great. So
Oh, that's awesome. Well,
that's the institute.
one of the themes of this show that has really emerged over the first couple of seasons is just this combination of people taking what they're passionate about, what they're gifted in, and then using it with really a purpose, right? And so the
Mhm.
fact that you've been able to do that, that you now in other, and I'm sure in other ways outside of the work that we're doing, but with sustainable giving, have really paid it forward. That really means a lot.
It's been great.
Okay, well, hey, so what would you say to a leader listening today? Most of our leaders are those nonprofit leaders. They're like, oh, I want to strengthen my recurring revenue model. They may not be using those words. Their recurring giving, their donations. There's a leader that wants to grow that. In the next 90 days of this year. This is the year I'm going to really focus on that. Where would you say? Um, where should they focus?
Yeah. So one thing I will say there's a resource which you had referred to. It's called Subscribed. So this is a book that Teen Zuo CEO and founder of Zora, wrote. I
Yeah.
think it has a lot of really good practical advice and case studies. We talked a little about finance and forward-looking metrics. It has definitions for different metrics. So a good guidebook that exists, I think, out there for some of the fundamentals. So if you're just getting started, or even if you're middle of the way through and you want to validate or redirection or sanity check anything, it's been a great book. And even myself being in this space as long as I have, I've got a copy sitting on my
Here,
desk.
here. It's sitting right behind me. I was like, oh,
Yep,
let me grab it. Oh, it's too far away.
I'll crack
But
it open.
and I will be, I'll be literally quoting from the subscription finance chapter here in a couple weeks.
Yep. Yeah, no, I'd say if you've got one thing, it's that. Teen also writes, I'm gonna give you a lot of content again, but, he writes an article called Subscribed Weekly, which is also if you're interested in kinda keeping up with some of the trends that are happening, both he and I write to that. The Subscribed Institute exists. There's a LinkedIn group, for that. I also publish a lot on LinkedIn and, getting a Substack going as well. Again, my whole goal is to get as much information as I can out there to help people make decisions. So beyond educating yourself, I think the number one thing is understanding your customer, and what that means to you, who they are. And I'm not an expert in the nonprofit ecosystem, but I glean it's probably as complex, if not more complex, than the world that I'm familiar with, and that you have several different players, and they all have different motivations. But to me, that's opportunity.
Yeah.
And if one of the things that I'm finding in this point in time is that there's so much creativity and opportunity for creativity, and how you think about who you're providing value to, and just having conversations is the right way to figure that out.
Yeah, I love that. Educate yourself, cultivate. I always talk about it as an outside mindset. This is one of the reasons why I think you as a guest is very so powerful, because you're adjacent to
Mhm.
the philanthropic space, but absolutely relevant and related. So educate yourself. We'll put all of those links, by the way, your LinkedIn, the book Subscribed, and Teens Subscribed weekly newsletter in the show notes, so people can access that. And then the second thing is to understand your customer, in this case, your donor, which is also, but to your point, your other stakeholders, your board members, your
Mm.
senior leadership. That's something we love to do. By the way, we have several projects at any given time running concurrently where we're actually talking to donors on behalf of specific charities, saying like, let's understand the nuances of why somebody gave to you and
Mhm.
not to somebody else, or not at all. And so that's so powerful.
Right on.
Right on. So, okay, last question. When you look at the future of recurring revenue, even recurring generosity, as we've talked about it, what gives you hope?
Hmm. Um, that we need one another. And this at the end of the day is fundamentally about relationships and communities, like at its core. And so I know that these models will persist because we need relationships. We need and want to feel like we're part of communities. There's a lot of research and studies that show that communities and relationships are keys to longevity. So it's not just a nice to have, it's something that's incredibly important to have. And, you layer a vehicle on top of that that allows for a fair exchange of value. And I really do think you have a recipe for something that endures.
No, so good. It's a great way to end it. Again, Amy, thanks for investing in just your career in the organizations you've helped, and in helping spread the word about what's been happening, the good stuff, and the hey, how do we move away from the bad actors, and also just the follow on effects that's having in the broader world of generosity. I truly believe, we talked about this just before we started recording. There's over 1 million nonprofits in the US today alone that have essentially been left behind with recurring revenue models. They
Mm.
were the 1999 era software companies, but that doesn't have to be the case. Now, not everybody's going to make the transition. Same, sort of situation. But the thing that I want nonprofit leaders to understand today, is that opportunity is present for you today. This is not something that, oh, I got to go be an early adopter and just as likely fail as succeed. No, the reality is we'll call it the early majority stage
Yep.
on
Yep.
philanthropic giving. Love it. Thanks, Amy.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Sustainable Giving Podcast. I hope you found the information helpful and that you're able to walk away with insights that you can use to start building a steady stream of recurring revenue for your organization. For even more resources to help you build a thriving recurring giving program, go online to sustainablegiving.org. That's sustainablegiving.org. And lastly, if a leader comes to mind that you think would benefit from this episode, would you do me a favor? Would you share this episode with them? Just that little act could be the difference they need to start growing sustainable recurring giving for their own organization. Until next time, thanks for joining us.